All right, here we are at the final chapter of our macroeconomics series. And honestly, we've saved one of the most important for last, the open economy. If you really want to get a grip on India's role in the global economy, which is a massive topic for your UPSC exams, then this is one explainer you absolutely can't miss.
So here's what we've got on the agenda today. We're going to start with the basics. What exactly is an open economy? Then we'll put on our detective hats and dig into the balance of payments, breaking it down into its two crucial parts. After that, we'll tackle the exchange rate. And for the grand finale, we'll connect all these dots and see how they played out in a real-life economic drama, India's 1991 crisis.
But before we dive into all the theory, let's start with a really serious question, one that keeps policymakers up at night. What happens when a country is on the verge of running out of foreign money? I mean, just imagine not being able to pay for the oil that runs your factories or for life-saving medicines. This isn't some abstract thought experiment. It's a situation India actually faced, and understanding this is absolutely key to understanding our economic policy today. Okay, let's start by laying the foundation. An open economy is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a country that doesn't live in a bubble. It's out there interacting with the rest of the world through trade and investment. It's the total opposite of a closed economy, which tries to do everything on its own. So how do these global connections actually work?
Well, these interactions happen in three main arenas. First up, you have the output market. This is all about goods and services. You know, when you're deciding between buying a car made in India versus one made abroad. Second, there's the financial market, where money flows freely across borders. Think of an Indian investor buying shares in a US company. And third, you've got the labor market, where companies set up shop in other countries and workers can move for jobs, although this one usually has the most rules and restrictions.
Okay, so if a country is constantly buying, selling, and investing all over the world, how on earth does it keep track of it all? That's where something called the balance of payments, or BOP, comes in. The easiest way to think about it is like a country's annual financial report. It's a detailed record of every single economic transaction it has with the rest of the world.
Now for your exam prep, the formal definition is really important. The balance of payments is a systematic statement of all economic transactions between the residents of a country and the rest of the world. The two words you've got to remember here are systematic, meaning it follows a very specific accounting method, and all transactions, meaning absolutely nothing gets left out.
So let's walk through a simplified example of what a BOP statement looks like. Right at the top, you see we have exports of 150 and imports of 240. Simple math gives us a trade balance of minus 90. That means we're buying more physical goods than we're selling. But then you add in the invisibles, things like services and income, and that brings our current account balance to minus 38. To make up for that shortfall, look down at the capital account balance. It's positive, which shows money flowing into the country through investments.
All right, now let's zoom in on those two big pieces we just mentioned, the current account and the capital account. Understanding the difference between these two is, without a doubt, one of the most essential concepts in this chapter.
This slide really breaks it down nicely. Think of it like this. The current account is like your monthly income and expenses. It tracks the day-to-day flow of goods, services, and money. The capital account is more like your overall net worth. It's about assets and liabilities. It tracks long-term things like who owns what, whether it's foreigners building factories in India or Indians buying bonds overseas.
Let's unpack that current account a little more. It's got four main parts. The first one, everyone knows, is trade in goods, which gives us the trade balance. The other three are called invisibles, pretty much because you can't physically see or touch them. These include trade in services, like our booming software exports, transfers, like the money sent home by relatives working abroad, and income, like profits earned from foreign investments.
Now, let's look at the capital account. This is where we track the big money movements for investments and loans. It includes things like external commercial borrowings, or ECBs, which is when Indian companies take loans from foreign banks. And most importantly, it includes foreign investment. This gets split into two types, FDI, or foreign direct investment, that's the long-term stuff, like building a factory, and FII, or foreign institutional investment, which is more short-term, like buying and selling stocks.
So, we've got all these transactions happening with different currencies flying around. But how do we figure out what they're worth? This brings us to the exchange rate. It's really just the price of one currency in terms of another. For example, how many rupees does it take to buy $1 US? That's the exchange rate.
Now here's a term that is absolutely critical to know. Devaluation. The most important word to remember here is deliberate. This isn't something that just happens by accident. Devaluation is a conscious policy decision by a government to intentionally lower the value of its currency. Why would they do that? To make their exports cheaper for other countries to buy.
But what about when the market is in charge of the exchange rate, not the government? Well, then we use different words: appreciation and depreciation. If the rupee appreciates, it gets stronger. That makes foreign goods cheaper for us to import. On the other hand, if the rupee depreciates, it gets weaker. This is fantastic news for our exporters because it makes their goods cheaper for foreigners to buy.
And now, for the main event. Let's see how all these concepts we've just discussed, the balance of payments, the current account deficit, the exchange rate, all came crashing together in a real-world economic emergency that literally changed the course of India's history.
We are, of course, talking about the 1991 balance of payments crisis. This was a moment when India was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to default on its international payments. It was, without a doubt, a major turning point for our entire economy.
By July 12, 1991, the situation was beyond critical. India's foreign exchange reserves had plummeted to just $975 million. To give you some perspective, that was barely enough money to pay for 3 weeks of essential imports. The country was, for all practical purposes, on the verge of going bankrupt. So how on earth did we get into such a mess? It was basically a perfect storm. The Gulf crisis caused oil prices to spike, which made our import bill massive. At the exact same time, the money sent home by Indians working in the Gulf, a huge source of foreign currency for us, just dried up. With our reserves in a complete freefall, the government made a bold, drastic move in July 1991. It devalued the rupee by almost 20%. This was just the first step in a wave of reforms that would eventually lead India to a modern, market-based exchange rate system.
So, what did we learn from this near catastrophe? Well, 4 huge lessons emerged that completely changed India's economic thinking. First, we learned that having a deficit isn't always a bad thing, as long as the borrowed money is invested productively. Second, we realized that keeping the current account deficit under control is absolutely vital for economic stability. Third, we saw that a flexible, market-determined exchange rate can act as a powerful shock absorber. And finally, this crisis was the very thing that forced our hand and pushed us toward the landmark 1991 reforms that opened up the Indian economy.
And to wrap it all up, let's test your knowledge. Go ahead and pause here and see if you can clearly answer these 3 questions. Really mastering these concepts, the difference between the BOP accounts, the causes of the 91 crisis, and how devaluation works is going to be so important for your prep. And with that, we've come to the end of our entire macroeconomics series. Thank you so much for joining us on this